Lovely. Well, it's nice to be given the opportunity to speak to the members of RAFA. So my name is Steve Roberts. I served just over 30 years with the Metropolitan Police, mostly as a detective. And during my career, I was fortunate enough to serve on some of the specialist investigation teams, headquarters of which are based at New Scotland Yard, such as the Flying Squad, the Kidnap Unit, Anti-Corruption Command, and the Murder Squad. And what I propose to do this morning is just explain to you how an ordinary person like myself became a detective, and then give you an insight to what it's like working on the flying squad of the Metropolitan Police, and depending on the time, talk a little bit about the Kidnapping Specialist Investigation Unit. But first of all, when did it all begin for me? Well, it began for me in 1976, when I finally plucked up the courage to apply for the Metropolitan Police. And surprisingly, they accepted me, and with one O-level in pottery. And then out of all the places they could have sent me to work in London, they sent me to Leman Street Police Station, which is in London's East End. And this was just a stone's throw from where I was brought up, in a place called Stepney. I don't know if many of you know Stepney, but for those of you who don't, it's renowned for some infamous characters such as the Cray twins, Jack the Ripper, and probably the most notorious of them all, Des O'Connor. And I can remember my first appraisal from my reporting sergeant, and he wrote under communication, good. Steve was able to communicate with the locals in their own language, but sadly this didn't impress the inspector, who recommended me for electrocution lessons. During my probationary period, which was 2 years long, I had a great deal of fun and camaraderie working with my colleagues, and my time was spent basically walking the beat, directing traffic, and hiding from some really horrible people. They were called sergeants. And towards the end of my probationary period, I can recall walking down the Commercial Road, which is the main arterial road from the City of London out through the East End towards Essex, better known as the A13. It was a winter's night and I'm freezing with the cold. My sense of humour is failing me, my Daymark thermal underwear is failing me, and I've got that little voice chirping away in the back of my head, Stevie, there is no way that you can do this for 30 years. So I thought, I know, I'll try and become a detective. In those days, to become a detective, you had to apply for the local crime squad. This is a team of uniform officers working in plain clothes, investigating local criminal offences. And much to my surprise, I managed to get onto this unit, and we investigated local crime such as thefts, house break-ins, drug offences, and something the locals refer to as jump-ups. I don't know if many of you have come across that term, but for those who don't or haven't, a jump-up is where a criminal jumps onto or into the back of a van, car, lorry and steals. And what do they steal? They steal joeys. And generally I ask the audience, what is a joey? And I get back, it's a threepenny piece, or it's a baby kangaroo. This is quite surprising. But it's a form of Cockney rhyming slang. It's Joe the elephant, elephant and castle, parcel. So a jump up is where a criminal jumps into the back of a vehicle and steals parcels and anything else that may be there. This type of crime is prevalent in London, but in that part of East London, the locals refer to the crime as jump ups and the property as joeys. And this is just to enable them to be able to speak in public places about their criminal acts, and ordinary members of the public wouldn't be able to understand what they're speaking about, unless of course they come from the RAFA Members Club. So we focused on the jump up, and just to give it a bit of context, where we was working in the East End of London, very, very close to Aldgate East, very close to Whitechapel. And around the Commercial Road area, there's a lot of fashion and textile wholesalers. And the jump up criminals, they're either on foot or in vehicles, just cruising around the area, just looking for vulnerable people. And basically, they're looking for vulnerable delivery drivers or customers who just leave their vehicles unattended outside these warehouses or outside the local cafes, you know, so they can have a cup of tea. In that short space of time when the vehicle's left, you know, the criminals will come along, and if it's clear, they will try and break into the vehicles and steal whatever property there is therein. And sometimes they would just select a vehicle and just follow it around London, just waiting for that opportunity, you know, to be able to break into the vehicle when it's left unattended. So it was a bit of a problem in the East End. So on occasions, we would focus on the jump-up criminals. On the days that we were going to work on the jump-up criminals, we would get up extra early on those particular days, so that on the way into Leman Street, we would first of all drive around the home addresses of the known jump-up criminals to find out what vehicles they've got parked outside their addresses. And there were occasions when I'd be in the police station, I'd be looking out the police station window and I can see the jump-up criminals walking around outside the police station. They're trying to find out what unmarked vehicles we're using. And you have to appreciate this is all local crime. They got to know us and we got to know them. And basically we would just secrete ourselves away, hide on rooftops, you know, have spotters, just looking out for jump-up criminals. If they're on foot, you soon get to pick them out. They look very, very furtive. And we would just get officers to follow them and hopefully arrest them in the commission of a crime. If they're in a vehicle, if the vehicle passes once, we don't pay it too much attention. The second time, it's attracted our attention. And on the third occasion, we think we got a vehicle in play and we would try and follow it with an unmarked vehicle and hopefully arrest them in the commission of a crime. So this type of crime's been going on throughout history. You know, even before we had motor vehicles, you know, we had plenty of, you know, carts and carriages taking goods to the local markets, and people would, you know, jump onto the backs of the vehicle and steal goods. So it's been going a long time. Like the criminals, I don't think they're doing anything wrong, because the way they look at it, they don't harm anyone. And they take it that all the property stolen is all insured, so they would call it a win-win situation. But as I say, they got to know us and we got to know them. And I can remember one day walking down that commercial road with two colleagues. You know, we're looking out for jump-up criminals. When we reached the junction with Watley Street, and as I'm looking down Watley Street, my mate shouts out, "Steve, look down there." And in the service road behind the shops, we can see three young men aged about 18, casually dressed, one of whom was Danny, and Danny was a jump-up criminal, and it looks as if they're up to no good. So now we're ducking down behind parked cars, behind lampposts, trying to get closer to find out what they're up to. Then suddenly one of the suspects screams out, "It's the old Bill, run!" So they start running, we start running. My mate Bob's managed to arrest one of these young men, while Danny and his mate get into the cab of an open back pickup truck and slowly start driving away. Well, I've kept running, I'm running faster and faster, and in those days I could run. And then I don't know what came over me, but when I was almost within touching distance of the tailgate of this open back pickup truck, I dived for it. Momentarily, I did feel like Superman flying through the air. And I've managed to grab hold of the tailgate and then frantically pull myself into the back of this truck. And that was when my brain suddenly engaged, and I thought, what on earth have I done now? And I was feeling slightly apprehensive, to say the least. I didn't have a personal radio with me on this particular day. I certainly didn't have a mobile phone with me in those days. And I wondered, what are they going to do to me? Are they going to beat me up, throw me in the River Thames, or worse still, use me to prop up some new flyover being built? Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I noticed a passenger is now climbing out through the passenger door window. So fearing for my safety, I reached inside my jacket pocket and I've taken out a truncheon. And I've explained to this young man exactly what I was going to do with the truncheon if I got a hint of him coming anywhere near me. But then surprisingly, he's leapt through the window, landed in the street, and he made good his escape. Now I'm clinging on for dear life with one hand, screaming at Danny, "Danny, will you stop?" Danny finally turns round, sees me on the back and shouts out, "Where the flipping hell have you come from?" Or words to that effect. I told Danny that he was nicked, although I haven't quite worked out what for at this stage, and he shouts back, "Where to? Lehman Street or Arbor Square?" "Lehman Street," I shouted. I thought that saves me having to walk him to the police station. And as Danny drives into the station yard at Lehman Street Police Station, I did feel ever so proud of myself, being so young in service, standing on the back of a pickup truck, driving into the backyard of Lehman Street Police Station. Once in the station yard, I've jumped off the back of this truck, and then I pulled back a huge piece of tarpaulin to uncover 3 huge beef carcasses that Danny has stolen from the butcher shop in Cockney Street. And throughout my service with the Metropolitan Police, Danny was a lovable rogue, and during our interview, he confessed to over 130 crimes, and that's all he used to do, was come out of Wapping in his pickup truck, drive around the East End, and if he came across anything that wasn't nailed down, then he would just assume the rights of the owner. But sadly, this didn't impress the local magistrate, who sent Danny away for a couple of months for his own good. So that's life on the crime squad. This was the stepping stone to become detectives. And after dealing with local crime for about 3 years, I went on a selection board for the CID, and I was selected. And then over the next period of time in my career, I was sent to various police stations in southeast London, working as a detective constable. And then I think I must have had about 12, 13 years service when I was selected for a unit called the Flying Squad, headquarters of which is based at New Scotland Yard. I just wonder how many of you watched that programme back in the 70s about the Flying Squad. I don't know if you remember John Thor and Dennis Waterman in a programme called The Sweeney. I doubt if Amy recalls watching a programme like the Sweeney.
It's funny, Steve.
And Jimmy, I asked the audience.
The one we've had John Billings, who's listening. His next question was, "Do you enjoy watching episodes of The Sweeney?" He prompted you there.
Yeah. See, I can read minds as well, so be careful, John. So, generally, I asked the audience, what crime do the Flying Squad investigate? And very, very few people generally get this. But the Flying Squad investigate all the major commercial armed robberies in London. So they investigate commercial armed robberies in respect of banks, post offices, building societies, jewelry shops, betting shops, and cash and transit vehicles, security vehicles. And when I was on the Flying Squad, London was divided into 4 areas. So there'd be a branch of the Flying Squad in the northwest of London, northeast of London, southwest of London, and I was at the southeast London branch of the Flying Squad, and we were based at Tower Bridge Police Station, and from Tower Bridge Police Station we would investigate all the major armed robberies in southeast London. And the Flying Squad's probably one of the few investigative units where quite a few of the officers are trained to use and carry firearms when necessary, and are trained in surveillance. So when we had big jobs on, we could do everything in-house. So we didn't have to sort of get assistance from other Scotland Yard teams. Whereas when I was on units like the Kidnap Unit or the Murder Squad, if we wanted surveillance assistance, we would go to the Metropolitan Police's dedicated surveillance teams or the dedicated firearms teams. But on the Flying Squad, we could do everything in-house. And one aspect of the Flying Squad's work that they are renowned for is something that's referred to as the pavement ambush. And the pavement ambush is where the Flying Squad officers get very, very good intelligence that an armed robbery is going to take place. And in those circumstances, what the police officers do, they secrete themselves in fairly close proximity to the premises to be robbed, or the location where they expect the security vehicle is going to be. And then they just wait. And it can be very, very tedious work. You know, you're there hour after hour. If it doesn't take place, we could end up coming back day after day. But when finally the robbers do turn up, just prior to the robbers actually committing the offence, so they're right on top of the premises or right on top of the security vehicle, the flying squad officers will leap out, ambush them, and hopefully arrest them. As I say, it's quite dangerous work, because it's bad enough letting the police loose with firearms, but invariably the robbers are armed with firearms. And sadly, over the years, there have been a few instances where there have been shootouts between the police and the robbers. A few police officers have been injured. A colleague of mine was shot by a bullet fired from automatic handgun. It's fired from the rear of a getaway car as it's being pursued by a flying squad car down the A2 through the London borough of Bexley. And bullets come through the windscreen of the flying squad car, ricocheted in the car, and it's grazed the officer in the front passenger seat on the forehead. But luckily for him, he made a good recovery. And sadly, there have been just a very, very few rare occasions when robbers have been shot and killed by police. But as I say, it happens very, very rarely, and I'm quite sure that when these instances have occurred, you've watched News at 10 and you can see what's happened, and there's always generally a big investigation. The independent police investigation teams get called in to make sure, you know, there is nothing untoward, and if there's such a phrase, a justified like killing. But the good news is that armed robbery has gone down drastically. Back in the 1990s, I think there was about 900 bank robberies in England and Wales. And then when I retired just over 10 years ago, it dropped down to 100. And I like to say that's all down to the good work of the flying squad, but they obviously had their part to play. But there's some other factors, such as the banks are more heavily defended, security wagons are more heavily defended. And probably one of the biggest things is, I think it was about 30 years ago, there used to be over 21,000 banks in England and Wales. But recently it had dropped down to under 7,000 banks. So now you've got the armed robber driving around just like trying to find a bank that's open or still there. So that's probably the main reason why it's gone down drastically. The flying squad. When did the flying squad begin? Well, the flying squad began in 1919. So this is like at the end of the First World War. Crime's gone through the roof. You know, there's a lot of sort of myths that, you know, everyone looks after everyone during the war times, but there was a lot of like crime went on, looting, you know, the black market was in full swing. This is a time when like gangs were like sort of coming up in East London, South East London. You know, you had Vice around the Soho area, and gangs like throughout were trying to get into crime. They tried to get into the gambling at the racetracks. Obviously, the Metropolitan Police covered Ascot and Epsom. And I don't know if you've ever seen a program called Peaky Blinders about like the gangsters. I think who like provide protection money for the bookies at the tracks and what have you. And so a lot of soldiers return from fighting overseas, you know, expecting to be treated as heroes, but they've come back. You know, they've got no unemployment. They've got families to look after. So you've got ordinary people sort of really getting engaged in crime just to provide food for their family. Obviously, there was people who were deserted from the services, and they got themselves involved in crime. And the criminal, it was quite a hardened criminal fraternity, really, what with, like, you know, people that have been trained to fight and what have you. So crime's gone through the roof. Things like commercial burglaries, they had doubled throughout the war. So the police wanted to do something about it. A detective chief inspector called Frederick Wensley worked at Scotland Yard. And what he wanted to do, he wanted to select a group of detectives who would, try and reduce these figures down. And this Mr. Wensley, he held a meeting at Scotland Yard, and he picked 12 detectives from all around London, and they were chosen because they were very, very good thief takers. They were very, very familiar with criminals, and they were tough individuals. And they were going to be permitted to go anywhere in London to combat this increasing crime, which was quite a big move, really, because up until that period in history, generally the police just kept to their own area. And if they needed to make inquiries into a crime and have to go onto another area, they would have to seek authority for the senior officer in that area. And it got a bit parochial at times. So after a while, the criminals realised if they commit a crime in one place and then went into a different area, it'd be most unlikely they would get arrested. So this team of officers, they would be allowed to go anywhere, and it was called the Mobile Patrol, given on loan from the Great Western Railway, 2 horse-drawn covered wagons. And if you want to know what they look like, just think about the last cowboy western you watch. It's just like the wagons from the wagon trains that they depict. And they had bench seats in the back of these wagons, and there'd be spy holes in the canvas. And the officers, they would look out, as they went along. And so they'd be looking out for known criminals. They would go into areas where there was a high level of crime. I think they had 2 uniform officers working in plain clothes. They would drive the horses. And apparently, this was cutting edge stuff at the time, and they were quite artful. And on their wagons, they had advertising boards on the side. So 1 minute, if they was in Hackney, they would be Smith's Fruiterers Hackney. Then if they went into another area like Bethnal Green, they changed the advertising board in and became Jones Butchers from Bethnal Green. And apparently they were fairly successful, but as time went on, the police in their wisdom found that the horse and cart wasn't really faring that well against the getaway car. And so they wasn't doing very well in relation to smash and grab raids, which were becoming more prevalent. So the police wanted to have some motor vehicles. Obviously, the country is broke after the war. There's no money about. So the police got turned down for motor vehicles. And if I just say, to put everything in the context, at this stage in history, the Metropolitan Police only had 2 vehicles. The commander, the commissioner had one, and the official receiver had the other. But there was a lot of military vehicles on the market, and the police managed to get hold of 2 Crosley tenders. So that's like a forerunner of a lorry. And but once again, it was similar to the wagons, and it had a canvas back. And once again, the officers had bench seats in the back and the spy holes. But and these vehicles, they've got 2 of them, one to patrol north of the River Thames and one south. And the police purchased these vehicles from the Royal Flying Corps, believe it or not. And they was used, in France during the First World War. They had no front brakes. Apparently, it was quite cumbersome, but the police, mechanics managed to tune these trucks up, and on a good day with the wind blowing, going downhill, they could reach speeds of almost 39 miles an hour. And they were successful. And as time went on, we've got more cutting edge equipment's coming in. We've got wireless telegraphy, so we've got a fixed transmitter at Scotland Yard, and then these Crosley tenders, they were fitted with wireless receivers. And these wireless receivers, they laid down low, and when they wanted to send a signal, they raised these legs up, but they looked like a bedstead upside down on the top of these wagons. And generally, they had to have someone like on the crew who knew Morse code, because that's how the communication was. But this was cutting edge stuff. Our staff, you know, Scotland Yard could send a message out to these vehicles if something was happening, and direct the vehicles to the particular location to take the appropriate action. And they, as I say, they were successful. And a crime journalist, G.T. Crook, I couldn't make this up, could I? He wrote an article for the Daily Mail about this new unit of detectives, and he referred to them as flying squads of pick detective. And I think he's called them that because they could go anywhere in London, and plus the fact they were purchased from the Royal Flying Corps, and that is apparently how the flying squad got its name, as the flying squad. And it still kept that name. If you corresponded with the flying squad, you know, their note paper is headed the flying squad, never Big Eagle, I think it is, flying in the middle of the headed note paper. So so that was it, and the flying squad, it was at the cutting edge all the time. And during the Second World War, towards the end, they formed what was called the Ghost Squad, and they selected 4 detectives to sort of go undercover to find out who was doing all the thieving of property and selling it on the mass market. And they all they would do is just glean the intelligence and pass it on to other officers to make arrests. But this unit only lasted for a couple of years. But this was the catalyst for setting up, the Metropolitan Police's own intelligence department. And as they've gone through history, the flying squad have been involved in big investigations. They got seconded to the Great Train Robbery in 1963, and then throughout the 60s, they were big robberies like the Brinks Mac robbery. Probably the last ones you're probably aware of. A few years ago, there was what was referred to as the Hatton Garden heist at Hatton Garden, when some criminals broke into the safe deposit vaults at Holborn and stole a large, high value of goods. I think it was over 200 million pounds worth, they estimated. And the flying squad got called in to investigate. This wasn't a robbery though, this was just a very, very serious crime. It's what we call a burglary. They didn't threaten anyone. And what was quite surprising, the 3 ringleaders were in their 70s and the youngsters were in their 60s. And I recognise a few of the individuals from when I was on the flying squad. So they were sort of like serious criminals. And they got captured. The flying squad managed to track all the suspects down, and I think most of them got a 7-year prison sentence where they pleaded not guilty, and I think one chap pleaded not guilty and he got 10 years. And another big job was in the year 2000, a big attempt to distill the Millennium Star from the Millennium Dome as we celebrated the new millennium. And if that robbery had come off, that would have been the biggest armed robbery in the world. Millennium Stone was valued at something like £250 million. And what happened there, the police got intelligence that a major armed robbery was going to take place. And through inquiries, they've managed to identify a few people, follow them, then identify the premises as the Millennium Dome. And on the day that the robbery was going to take place, the police are all there secreted inside the premises in disguises, they've got their firearms hidden in bins and what have you. And the criminals stole a big JCB digger, crashed through the exterior fence, and once they entered the premises, they were ambushed by the flying squad. And what was unique about these robbers, they didn't use vehicles to get a getaway. They carried out a few robberies, and they would use the River Thames as their getaway route. So on this particular day, the river police were working with the flying squad. It must be the only occasion throughout history that the river police worked with the flying squad. But when I was on the flying squad, you dealt with armed robberies in two ways, reactively and proactively. So reactively is where we respond to like a bank robbery when it's taken place. Subsequently, we would turn up, preserve the scene for the fingerprints and the forensic people, take statements, look for clues and hopefully get some good leads to arrest the suspects. The other method is proactively, and that's where the officers get very, very good intelligence that a major investigation is going to take place. And in those circumstances, the officers sort of target the criminals, follow them, and hopefully arrest them in the commission of a crime. But that's very, very labour intensive and very, very expensive, but you get some very, very good reports. And also during my time at Tower Bridge, you worked in pairs, and you and your partner, roughly every 4 to 5 months, would have to go on the duty car. We called it the bank car. It's a big unmarked, powerful saloon, and it's driven by an advanced driver. And the advanced driver's job is to ferry me and my partner around South East London for a week, and during that week, we have to investigate all the major armed robberies in South East London. And I can remember being on the bank car, and we're in at Tower Bridge, and we get a call over the radio. A post office security wagon has been held up down in Orpington, South East London, on the borders of North West Kent. Me and my partner John just jump in the back of the car. The driver stuck what I used to call the Kojak lamp on top of the car, and he just hurtles all the way down towards Orpington, and he is really motoring. He's going so quickly, he managed to reach 19 miles an hour down the Old Kent Road, and that does take some doing. But by the time we finally get down to Orpington, the robbers have decamped with the money. So first thing we do is make sure the crew are okay. Once we've done that, we then preserve the scene for our forensic people and our photographer. And preserving the scene of any major criminal investigation is probably the most fundamental aspect to any criminal investigation, because if you don't get that right in the first instance, it'd be most unlikely you would be able to retrieve the situation. So, for example, you could have tire marks, footmarks, cartridge cases on the ground, and if people walk all over it, the evidence gets obliterated. So I used to pay great attention to preserving the scene. In fact, I can remember working at one particular police station in South East London, and I was responsible for making assessments into suspicious deaths. So I would have to decide whether or not the murder squad were needed to be called in. And one day I'm in my office, I receive a phone call, and I'm told some builders have dug a great big hole in the garden to a terraced house. So I go down to have a look. I have a look around this garden. I can see this great big hole. I can see at the bottom of this hole there's a skull, and I also noticed this great big hole, the skull, is adjacent to the patio. And my mate turns around to me and says, "This could be a body from World War II," but I'm thinking more like Fred West II. So I've cordoned off the area, and then I've called for the forensic people and the photographer. And most importantly, I've called for the forensic pathologist. So hopefully he's going to be the expert to give the best advice. He comes down, quite an important guy, has a stroll around. And before I can say anything, he's jumped into this great big hole. And I'm thinking, what on earth are you doing to my crime scene? And he does no more. He picks up the skull, has a quick look at it, and he throws it at the hole towards me. And he says, you have a look. I just about caught this thing. I've turned it over, and on the back it's got made in Hong Kong. So needless to say, I swiftly ended that investigation. Anyway, we'll get back to Orpington. So we preserved the scene down at Orpington, and we go off taking statements, look for the location of the getaway car, and then when we finish, we go back to Tower Bridge because we're still the duty car. Then a couple of days later, we get given some information about a possible suspect for the Orpington robbery, and we get given the name Champagne Sid. Well, luckily we're detectives, so we could work out that Champagne Sid is a nickname. So we carry out some research, we identify Champagne Sid, and he is a prolific criminal, but no previous convictions for armed robbery. So now we have to decide, what are we going to do with this information? And basically, before we can do anything more with it, we need to sort of firm it up, to substantiate it in some way. So now my partner and I, we're getting up around about 4 o'clock in the morning, and we go over to near where Sydney lives, and we find ourselves a little place, a little hideaway place. And from our little hideaway, we can see Sydney's front door. And what we want to do is we just want to watch Sydney and build up a profile of Sydney. So we want to know what's he doing, who's he mixing with, what car is he driving, and you know, what time's he going out and what time's he coming back. Extremely boring work. You know, we're there for like 15 hours a day. I'll get bored really easy, so within 5 minutes I've opened my Tupperware box and munched all my sandwiches, so I've got a long day ahead of me. But by doing this work, we can build out a profile of Sydney, and we soon discover that Sydney doesn't go to work, but does have a lavish lifestyle, hence the name Champagne Sid. And he is seen meeting known criminals who are actively engaged in committing armed robberies. So that really gives us the credit, the validation to put more expensive resources into the investigation. So me and my partner, we still do the observation, but now we've got our own surveillance team are in the area, and as soon as Sydney leaves his address, we call up the surveillance boys and women, and they follow him, follow Sid wherever he goes. And after a number of weeks, the surveillance team established that Sydney suffers from some form of obsessive compulsive disorder, because every morning he would go and watch security vehicle deliveries to banks. And in police parlance, we call that a clue. So he's looking like a good suspect now. And by continuing to follow around Sid, we identify the rest of the team. The number 2 in the team is Champagne Sid. It's not me who gives these characters these nicknames, but Champagne Sid was 55. Harry the Rat was age 66, prolific armed robber, not always successful. He must have spent at least half his life residing in one of Her Majesty's non-pound bedsets. And the third member, a lot younger, in his early 30s, referred to as Dave. And between us, I wouldn't like to meet Dave on a dark night. Anyway, so we're following these 3 men. They're looking at security vehicle deliveries to banks, post offices and building societies. After a while, they start going down into Kent, looking at the same type of premises. And then they start going into Surrey. All the time they're looking, we're following. And then suddenly, out the blue, they start going to Sussex, East Sussex. They start monitoring a particular security vehicle delivery to a bank in a place called Hampden Park, which is on the A22, just outside of Eastbourne. This looks like where the robbery's going to take place. So on the day we believe it's going to take place, we have a big briefing in South East London in the early hours of the morning. You know, we're mob banded now, about 40 officers strong. We've got flying squad officers, armed officers. We've got big unmarked police vehicles, powerful cars called gunships, 2 gunmen in the back, driven by an advanced driver. flying squad officer in the front passenger seat to deal with all the communications, encrypted radio systems. That officer's also the map reader. Because we're so far from Tower Bridge, we often got lost in the country lanes. And you know what it's like, you can never find a policeman when you want one. So once we have our briefing, you know, we're just waiting. I'm in one of the front passenger seats of one of the gunships. And once the robbers, they all meet up, get in one vehicle, travel down the A21 towards Tunbridge Wells before turning off on the A26 towards East Sussex. And these are major criminals. You know, they carry out all the anti-surveillance techniques. The surveillance officers have got to be very, very acute. It's still early in the morning, not many cars on the road. The gunships on the way down, they're there to support the surveillance teams, just in case anything untoward takes place. But they can't get too close, because if the surveillance, if the robbers saw the gunships, they would know it's the police. They would know it's the flying squad. But and they can't be too far away, just in case anything does happen. Yeah, and these gunships, if one of them was parked outside your home address, you would do no more than phone 999 and say there's a big car with 4 big, fat, ugly-looking men in it. And that often used to happen, because sometimes when the robbers sort of like went back on themselves, the gunships would have to dive for cover. And so we would end up parking on someone's drive. And then within about 10 minutes, we'll have the local Bobby knocking on the windscreen, wondering who we are. But we managed to get all the way down to Eastbourne without incident. Once we get down there, we can all now feel the tension in the air. Like, this looks like it's going to take place. And the gunships all secrete themselves away. And we're just sitting in the cars. Just, you know, some people are studying for promotion. Some are doing a telegraph crossword. that may surprise a few of you. And yeah, so we're just sort of whiling away the time. And these are professional criminals. They are just walking all around the streets just to see if there's any hint of the police in the area. Once it gets round to about 8, 9 o'clock, we'll send someone out the cars to go and get the bacon sandwiches, because there's more people about. And the only reason I share this useless piece of information is that's why a lot of the officers were overweight. You spent 12 hours sitting in these cars, you know, you don't walk no more than 2 yards. You get back to Tower Bridge, you could walk out the car and you think, oh, what a day we've had. And then you would go and have a drink. So that was sort of the culture. There was a bit of a drink culture in those days. But anyway, so we've got like the commander, he's with the officers doing the surveillance. So now we've got officers in an observation post. We're called MOP1, and they can see the high street and they can see the bank. And after several hours sitting in these cars, the radio crackles into life and we hear all cars from OP1. The security wagon has just arrived outside the bank. None of us are talking now. We're just getting ready. We're putting on our ballistic vests. The driver's getting the car ready. I don't know what the gunman doing about, but all I can hear is click, click. And then after a few minutes, we hear all cars from OP1. Harry the Rat has just dropped off Champagne Sid and Dave, and they are walking towards the security vehicle. So we're all now, none of us are talking, we're just focused. You can feel the tension in the air. And all we're getting is they're getting closer and closer to that security vehicle. After a while, the commander comes over the radio and he orders the gunships to come out of their hiding position and just move up closer towards the bank. Then we're back to OP1. The suspects are getting closer and closer to the security vehicle. And when those suspects are virtually on top of that security vehicle, the commander comes over the radio, attack, 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 and all the gunships go forward. Except our car, we're balked in traffic. It's not like that in the TV programme. Our gunmen are out running down the road now. It's pandemonium. Members of the public shouting, police officers with firearms out, Sussex police helicopter flying overhead. And one of the armed officers goes straight up to Champagne Sid and shouts out, get lost, this is my job. And Champagne Sid for whatever reasons, only thought the armed policeman is another robber trying to take his robbery away from him. And I can only assume it's just the tension that everyone's under. Anyway, if I just pause that story for a moment, that is an example of a pavement ambush, and it goes in so quickly that neither robber has taken their firearm out. Champagne Sid's searched. In his inside jacket pocket, he's carrying a loaded revolver. Dave, every time we ever saw David, we always carry a small blue towel, and it looked like he's going for a swim. But we took the towel off of him, and he's got a big Magnum handgun loaded. So that's taken away. The two criminals get taken away. So we get back to the story. Champagne Sid, he's driving around the block thinking he's picking up his mates. He comes down a small road. He's obstructed because there's a flying squad like up ahead with just the driver in. The flying squad driver sees Harry the Rat in the rearview mirror. Harry the Rat sees the flying squad driver. They ensue in their own car chase, reaching speeds of almost 30 miles an hour, which is pretty fast because they're both travelling backwards at this stage, before Harry the Rat crashes into a small brick garden wall and he comes to a halt. So he's arrested, and 3 men get taken to Lewes, Brighton and Eastbourne, all interviewed, all charged with firearms offences and conspiring to commit armed robbery in East Sussex. And they go to the local magistrates' court and then get remanded in custody to Lewes prison. We came down mob-handed a few weeks later, and we took the suspects to Maidstone police station, and we put the suspects on an identification parade for the Orpington job. None of them got picked out, so that was the end of that. And the reason I put that down to is that the suspects were heavily disguised. They were heavily disguised in Eastbourne, so we assume that they were heavily disguised down in Orpington. But a number of months later, there's a big trial for the Hampden Park job. Champagne Sid pleads guilty, gets 10 years. The other 2 plead not guilty, get found guilty by the jury, and they both got 14 years, so quite a substantial custodial sentence. So that's an example. That particular job, that's a job that started off as a reactive inquiry and then went into a proactive investigation. We're in that proactive mode. Obviously, you get a lot of evidence. You know, we filmed the robbery, we recover the guns, we recover a number of stolen cars. You know, and they were heavily disguised. And with Champagne, Champagne Sid, he was a character. You would like him to give you a presentation. He was quite an interesting guy. But he had this thing, you know, I think criminals, they've got this thing about having the kudos of being a major criminal. And Champagne Sid was apparently told that to have the kudos of being a major criminal, he's got to go across the pavement, i.e. commit an armed robbery. And once it all went wrong, he just wanted to confess, get himself into prison and get released as quickly as possible. So that's life on the flying squad. A lot of people think it's really, really interesting and exciting, but you spend hours and hours, you know, keeping people under observation. And I think that's why I wear glasses now. I go back to working in South East London, and before being selected for the Kidnap and Specialist Investigation Unit based at New Scotland Yard. What do they deal with? Well, the clue is in the title. They deal with kidnaps, but only kidnaps where the hostage is outstanding and there's a ransom demand. And just to reassure everyone, there's not many kidnaps in London or anywhere else in the UK, but when you have one, it is a major criminal investigation. And I spoke about reactive crime and proactive crime. With a kidnap, we call that a crime in action. So as the crime's being perpetrated, we're trying to solve it. It's unlike any other crime because there's so many things you can't do. Obviously, the number one priority is the safe recovery of the hostage. So you can't do anything that's going to impinge on their safe recovery. Once they're recovered, then we can focus more about the evidence. And the unit deals with all immediate life-threatening time-critical investigations, such as blackmail, product contamination, which is where product contamination is where criminals like poison sort of food and secrete it into a supermarket, and they demand large sums of money. That happen very, very rarely, but when you have one, once again, it's a major criminal investigation. And during my time on the unit, we also dealt with specialist casework, which is really high profile reactive crime. So a colleague of mine dealt with Jonathan Aiken, who was a Conservative minister, I think went to prison for perjury. My team, we investigated a lord, and this lord's written numerous best-selling books that have been sold throughout the world. I don't know if anyone can come up with the name of that individual. Nearly became Mayor of London. And yeah, very, very interesting type work. With the kidnaps, some of the ones we dealt with were what I call bad on bad. Criminals kidnapping other criminals because of some argument or some outstanding debt. We would still rescue them, you know, got all the human rights legislation. But invariably I found if you got a result at court, the suspects did not get as long a custodial sentence as when an ordinary member of the public was abducted. And it was they were very difficult to manage because really the hostage, like he's a criminal, he generally had more criminal convictions than all the kidnappers put together. And you know, trying to communicate with them, you know, you could just imagine what they was telling us to do at times. We also dealt with a number of jobs involving migrants who would come into the UK from abroad. We had a couple of big cases involving Chinese migrants, economic migrants. They just want to get into Europe or the United States and just work and send money home. But they would contact snakeheads, Chinese criminals in China, and these snakeheads would facilitate their journeys out of China and then into the United States or somewhere in Europe. And we rescued 3 hostages in southeast London. We got a call, and one of the hostages had already escaped, and so we was on the case, and we managed to locate a number of addresses, and we rescued 3 hostages, one of whom had been detained 22 months because his family wouldn't pay up for sort of the demand. Their story was they came from the south of China, quite a poor area, and snakeheads would facilitate their journey out of China into Laos, into Bangkok. They get put on a plane, flew into Gatwick, and they're told to destroy their passports on the aircraft, and then they just claimed political asylum when they come into Gatwick. And there to meet them was a Mr. Wang, who was an authorised legal representative and an interpreter to meet these people coming into the country at Gatwick. But he was a criminal in his own right. In fact, he owned 2 of the premises that we searched. You know, once they come through immigration, they just get given a form to go to the immigration department, you know, a few weeks later. Once they come out of the airport, the snakeheads working in London, they take these people to an address and they're detained there until outstanding monies are paid by their families to the snakeheads in China. And they're beaten up, made to cry and scream down the phone to sort of put pressure on the families back in China. So they're quite a lucky escape. But this particular job, you know, once we've done the rest, now we've got to prepare, you know, a amount of paperwork for a big trial at the Old Bailey. And the boss needs 2 detectives to go all the way to China to carry out further inquiries. So yours truly and my sergeant, we flew to Beijing, and we met by a host, a very, very hospitable man, who's arranged a banquet for us that evening. We're in a slight state of panic now because the sergeant's cases have ended up in Hong Kong, so he's got nothing to wear. So now we're shopping in Beijing, trying to find the sergeant something to wear. He's a big bloke, Peter, the sergeant. You know, he's got a 22-inch neck. You know, we were struggling to find a scarf to wrap around him. But that evening, we end up at this nice restaurant. We're all booted and suited, except for the sergeant. He looks like the man out the milk tray head, dressed all in black. And because, you know, he's got this turtleneck jumper that's so tight on him, looks like he's eaten a couple of boxes of dairy milk chocolate. But the first course comes up. To me, it looks like soup. I put my spoon in and I've hit something rather hard. On closer examination, I could see it's a chicken's foot. And I wondered, what do you do with it? Do you crunch it, do you nibble it, or do you put it on your keyring for luck? I didn't know. So I had a quick look round. When I thought no one was looking in my direction, I quickly scooped it up and put it into my serviette and then placed it into my right trouser pocket. And then in order not to offend our host, I've had a few slurps of the soup, and that just reminded me of the mouthwash at my local dentist. After a few more courses, the likes of which I've never tasted before, we're each given a small bowl with a lid. I remove the lid and I'm struck by this almighty smell that attempts to penetrate my body by wafting up my nose. So, fearing asphyxiation, I quickly put my hand over my nose and mouth and pretended I've got a cough so that I could breathe more easily. I look at the contents of the bowl. Vegetable, mineral or animal, to this day I'm not really sure. Peter said they were sea slugs and promptly put one into his mouth, and now he's coughing and spluttering, knocking back half a pint of lager to get it down. Then, anyway, I've already decided I'm going to gulp this thing down in one. So I'll pick a nice slimy, juicy sea slug and I'll place it in the back of my throat. I'll give an almighty gulp, and I can feel this thing slowly slithering down. And then I've got that little voice in the back of my head, Stevie, there's no way I can keep this down. And now I can feel the thing galloping back up again. So I quickly took my handkerchief out, and with sleight of hand, I've managed to palm the slug into my handkerchief. And you can guess where this is going. I put it into my right trouser pocket, and now I've got more food in my right trouser pocket than I've eaten. We have a few more courses, still haven't had anything appetising. And then out of the canteen area, or the cooking area, I see a great big bowl of rice coming out. I thought, oh, fantastic, something I can finally eat. They put the rice on these circular tables that we were sitting at, and as the rice is coming round, I noticed everyone's ignoring the rice. I thought, no, not me. I'm going to have some of this. And as the rice reaches me, I'm about to dive in with my spoon when someone touches me on the shoulder. I turn round, it's the interpreter. He says, don't eat the rice. I said, what do you mean, don't eat the rice? He says, it's a sign of disrespect. It means your host hasn't given you enough food to eat. So in order not to offend, we let the rice go, and that was the last chance of having anything substantial to eat. But to put a bit of balance into the story, the Chinese authorities were very, very good, and we obtained all the statements from the families of the hostages and what have you. Big trial at the Old Bailey that we came back to. All the suspects were charged with forced imprisonment and demanding money with menaces. All pleaded not guilty, found guilty, and they all got 14 years. So that's life on the kidnap unit. Probably the most interesting, exciting, but demanding job I've had in the police service. And going back to the beginning, I never thought in my wildest dreams that whilst freezing down the commercial road, I never thought the police would be sending me to places like China, Thailand, and several places in the United States. So I'm truly grateful. Anyway, that's Tales of the Scotland Yard Detective. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We've had a few questions come through, and if anyone wants to feed in their questions, they can do now. I was hooked, but I tell you what, I did not need a slug conversation. So the first one is, did you use Sweeney phrases like "put your trousers on, Tinkerbell, you're nicked"?
No, there might be the odd phrase, you know, like no, I can't remember. No,
He
I
doesn't
don't
want to admit
recall
to them. That's what it
something
is.
like that. But it would just come in the spur of the moment. Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Yeah. No,
Sheena says,
I can't remember, but okay.
I had a question through from Sheena. So, how did Steve cope with obviously guilty criminals being found not guilty and getting released?
Well, it didn't happen that often, really. When you're at like this level, you know, you've got so many resources. You know, like even on the kidnap unit, when we were dealing with the CPS, we dealt with like the top CPS lawyers, and generally would, like, when you're going for a big trial, you know, you'd have like top barristers and what have you. So, I don't think that was a problem. Not like when I was at Lemon Street on that crime squad. I can remember going to Snaresbrook Crown Court, and it was dishonest handling, and it was a stone bonker, right? But the chap got acquitted, and his solicitor said to me, "Oh, Steve," he said, "don't worry." He said, "That's what I call a travesty of justice." But it was something else. But at the higher end, I don't think I can't recall losing many and getting upset over it.
That's good though, isn't it? So we've just had lots of thank yous come through, Steve. So we've just slightly run out of time now. So we've had just a great storyteller. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, he's just lots of really good positive comments. So we're very grateful for your time, Steve. In normal situation, we would give you a round of applause. So anyone at home wants to give themselves a round of applause, that would be lovely for Steve. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got another session tomorrow at 11 with Chris Goss, who's talking air warfare over the Bay of Biscay, so a history lesson with Chris. And then we have a session on Friday as well. So there's all sorts going on, but we're very grateful for Steve to join us today. You can catch up on this session as well later on our website. And if you've got any questions, if you want to direct them to opconnect@rafa.org.uk. So that's opconnect@rafa.org.uk. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, Steve. Thank you everyone for joining in, and we'll have a lovely day and speak to you soon.